Excuse me, Professor. I believe there is an error in line 3 of your proof. The room went dead silent. 300 people turned to stare at the young black woman standing in the back row. Professor Whitfield did not even look up from the board. Security lets anyone in these days. He turned slowly. Let me guess, community college? You smell like a 4-hour bus ride. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further. A graduate student next to her grabbed his bag and moved 2 seats away. The front row laughed. Someone pulled out a phone and started filming. A woman in the 3rd row whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Who let her in here?" Not one person stood up for her. Not one. But every single person in that room was about to learn a lesson they would never forget.
Man, they really underestimated her. Let's see how this plays out.
To understand what happened next, you need to understand where this story takes place. Harvard University.
Cambridge, Massachusetts. One of the most powerful academic institutions on the planet. And inside that institution, there was a man who believed he owned the building. Professor Lawrence Whitfield. 61 years old, tenured professor of mathematics, chair of the Department of Applied Mathematics, fellow of the American Mathematical Society, author of a graduate textbook cited over 14,000 times. His grandfather was a Harvard dean. His father was a Harvard professor. Lawrence Whitfield did not attend Harvard. He inherited it. Every autumn, the university hosted a 2-week event called the Whitfield Distinguished Lecture Series in Applied Mathematics. Read that name again. The lecture series was named after his family, funded by his family's endowment, organized by him, judged by him. It was his kingdom. The event brought together the best graduate students, postdoctoral researchers, and visiting scholars from across the country. On the final days, there was a public competition, 4 rounds of increasing difficulty. Participants solved problems on a whiteboard in front of a live audience. A panel of 3 judges scored each round. After each round, the lowest scorers were eliminated. The winner received 2 things: a public commendation from Harvard, and a personal letter of recommendation from Professor Whitfield. For most people in that room, that letter was a nice bonus. For the woman standing in the back row, it was everything. Her name was Celeste Ingram, 23 years old, born and raised in Anacostia, one of the poorest neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. Her mother, Darlene Ingram, cleaned offices at Georgetown University for 18 years. They never had much. Some weeks they did not have enough. Celeste taught herself advanced mathematics, not at a prep school, not with a private tutor. She used discarded textbooks and free MIT lecture videos on a tablet with a cracked screen. She watched the same lectures over and over until the concepts stopped being confusing and started being obvious. She earned a full scholarship to Howard University, graduated summa cum laude, double major in pure mathematics and philosophy, top student in her department. Then she applied to doctoral programs at every Ivy League university in the country. Every single one rejected her. The letters were polite. They all said the same thing: not the right fit. No explanation, no feedback. Just a closed door with a polite sign on it. So Celeste took a job tutoring math at a community center in D.C. She saved money. She waited. And when she heard about the Whitfield Lecture Series, open enrollment, anyone could audit. She bought a bus ticket to Boston. 4 hours on a Greyhound, a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a budget motel 6 miles from campus, gas station sandwiches for dinner.
She did not come to make friends. She came because that letter could open every door that had been slammed in her face. But from the moment she walked in, the room made one thing clear. She was not welcome. It was not just Whitfield. It was everything. The portraits on the walls, all white men. The leather seats filled with students who greeted each other by first name. The way people looked at her backpack and then looked away. A staff member near the entrance asked if she was there for the catering setup. During the first 2 days, Celeste sat in the back row and took notes. She watched how Whitfield treated different people. When white students asked questions, he leaned forward. He engaged. He smiled. When a black visiting student asked a question, he paused. He rephrased it. More precisely, he said, then answered his own version. He did not smile. A graduate student named Bradley Chambers sat near Celeste on day 2. He turned to his friend and said, loud enough for her to hear, "I did not know they gave auditing passes to community colleges." His friend laughed. Celeste did not react. She kept writing. That night, alone in her motel room, she read the competition rules one more time. 4 rounds, open to all participants, judged on correctness, elegance, and speed. She closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. She had not come this far to sit in the back row. But Celeste did not know that the hardest part was not getting into the competition. It was what Professor Whitfield had already planned for anyone who dared to challenge him. Day 3. Professor Whitfield stood at the front of the lecture hall, chalk in hand, working through an advanced proof involving graph coloring. His writing was fast and confident. Every line flowed into the next like he had done this 1,000 times. The room was quiet. 300 people watched in admiration. But Celeste was not watching with admiration. She was watching with focus. Her eyes moved from line 1 to line 2. Fine. Line 2 to line 3. She stopped. She tilted her head. She looked at her notebook. She looked back at the board. She checked her notes again. In line 3, Whitfield had distributed a negative sign across a binomial expression, but he had missed the second term. The sign should have been positive, not negative. It was a small error, the kind that most people would overlook. But Celeste was not most people. She could already see the chain reaction. That one wrong sign changed the inequality in line 5, which collapsed the bound in line 8, which meant the entire conclusion was wrong. She raised her hand. Whitfield did not look at her. He scanned the front rows, pointed at Graham Ashford, his star doctoral student sitting in the second row, and took his question instead. Graham asked something about real-world applications. Whitfield smiled and answered warmly. They exchanged ideas like old friends. Celeste's hand was still in the air. Whitfield finally glanced toward the back of the room. His smile disappeared. Yes, the auditor? Not her name. Not Miss. Not you in the back. The auditor. A category, not a person. Celeste began to speak. Professor, in the third line of your proof, he held up one finger and cut her off. I will take questions from enrolled participants first. If there is time at the end, auditors may submit questions in writing. He turned back to the board. Conversation over. The room was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from sympathy, the kind that comes from discomfort. A few students in the front row exchanged glances. Bradley Chambers smirked. Someone in the middle section whispered, "She really thought she could just speak up?" Nina Dawson, a black woman sitting next to Celeste, another auditing visitor, gripped her armrest so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked at Celeste with an expression that said, "Let it go. It is not worth it." But Celeste did not let it go. She looked at the board. She looked at the man who had just reduced her to a label.
She looked at 300 people who had already decided she had nothing worth saying, and she raised her hand again. This time, the room noticed. Not because they supported her, because they were curious, the way a crowd is curious when someone walks toward a cliff edge. Graham turned around in his seat. 2 postdocs in the middle stopped whispering. Even Bradley looked back. Whitfield saw the hand. He knew the room was watching. If he ignored her again, it would look petty.
If he let her speak, she might embarrass herself, which would prove his point. He sighed. The sigh of a man doing someone a favor they did not deserve. Fine. Go ahead. Celeste stood up. She did not rush. She did not stammer. She looked directly at the board and opened her mouth. And what she said next made every single person in that room stop breathing. Celeste stood in the back row. She did not step forward. She did not move to the aisle. She just stood exactly where she was and spoke in a voice that was calm, clear, and absolutely steady. In line 3, when you distributed the negative across the binomial, the second term should be positive, not negative. She paused. Not for dramatic effect. She paused because she was giving the room time to look at the board. That changes the inequality in line 5, which means the bound you stated in line 8 does not hold. Then she sat down. That was it. 3 sentences, no elaboration, no apology, no, I could be wrong, but... She said what she saw, and she sat down. The room did not react immediately. There was a silence. Not the polite kind, not the respectful kind. It was the silence of 300 brains doing math at the same time. Every head in the room turned toward the board. Eyes moved to line 3. Fingers traced the negative sign. Lips moved silently, recalculating. One by one, the realization spread across the room like a wave. She was right. The sign was wrong. The inequality in line 5 collapsed. The bound in line 8 was invalid. The entire conclusion, the conclusion that a tenured Harvard professor had just presented with absolute confidence, was built on a mistake that a 23-year-old woman from Anacostia had caught in under 2 minutes. It took the room about 8 seconds to figure that out. It took Professor Whitfield about 3. He knew before anyone else did. You could see it in the way his hand stopped moving. You could see it in the way his jaw tightened, just slightly, before he turned around. But Lawrence Whitfield had not spent 61 years in academia without learning how to protect himself. He turned to face the room. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that costs a lot of effort. An interesting observation, he said. The sign is indeed reversed. However, this does not materially affect the conclusion of the proof. That was a lie. And every person in that room with a graduate-level education knew it was a lie. The sign error did not just affect the conclusion, it destroyed it. Whitfield was betting that the authority of his name would outweigh the authority of her math. For 61 years, that bet had always worked. But something was different this time. A postdoctoral researcher in the front row, a woman named Dr. Sarah Bennett, opened her notebook and started rechecking the proof from line 1. Then, a student 2 rows behind her did the same thing. Then Graham Ashford, Whitfield's own protege, pulled out a pen and began working through the derivation. The silent rechecking was the judgment. No one said a word. No one needed to. The sound of pens scratching on paper said everything. Whitfield watched it happen. He stood at the front of the room and watched his own students verify that he was wrong. and that the woman he had just humiliated was right. The narrator said he did not lose the room in that moment, but for the first time in his career, he felt it shift. And at the panel table, something else was happening. Dr. Evelyn Calloway, visiting professor from Princeton, one of the foremost number theorists in the country, and one of the only black women to hold a named chair at a top 10 research university, tilted her head slightly. She looked at the board. She looked at Celeste. She opened her notebook and wrote 2 words. Check her. She did not say anything out loud. She did not need to. She had seen enough.
During the break, Nina grabbed Celeste's arm in the hallway. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Celeste looked at her. "I pointed out a sign error." Nina stared at her. "You just pointed out a sign error to a man who named a lecture series after himself. In his own building. In front of his own students. In front of 300 people." Celeste's expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes. Not triumph, something quieter than that. A realization. Maybe the door was not as locked as she had always believed. The break ended. Students filed back into the hall. The energy in the room had changed. It was subtle, but it was real. People who had ignored Celeste before were now glancing at her, not with warmth, not yet, but with curiosity. The kind of curiosity that comes when you realize you might have underestimated someone. And then Whitfield made his move. He walked to the front of the room and made an announcement. He said that, in the spirit of open scholarship, the upcoming public competition would be expanded. All participants, including auditing guests, were welcome to register. He looked directly at Celeste when he said it. He smiled. It was a warm smile, a generous smile, the kind of smile a man gives when he is setting a trap. "After all," he said, "if our auditing guest has such a sharp eye for errors, I am sure she will find the competition quite stimulating." A few students laughed. Bradley Chambers grinned. But Celeste did not laugh. She did not grin. She looked back at Whitfield with an expression that gave away nothing. She nodded once. She was in. And she had no idea, not yet, that the game had already been rigged before it even started. Day 5. The lecture hall had been transformed. The chairs were rearranged into a competition format. The panel of 3 judges sat at a long table at the front. A large whiteboard stood in the center of the stage. The first 2 rows were reserved for the 12 official participants. The remaining seats were packed with spectators. Every seat was taken. People stood along the back wall. Celeste sat in the first row for the first time. She was the only participant without a formal invitation, the only auditor, the only Howard graduate, the only person carrying a backpack instead of a leather portfolio. 12 competitors. 11 of them had been handpicked by Whitfield. The 12th had been dared to show up. The rules were simple. Each round, a problem appeared on the board. Participants had a set amount of time to solve it, then present their solution. The panel scored on 3 criteria: correctness, elegance, and speed. Lowest scores were eliminated each round. The final round would be one-on-one. Round 1. An optimization problem. A variant of what mathematicians call the assignment problem. A scheduling puzzle involving how to match tasks to resources in the most efficient way. The other participants began setting up the standard approach. It was called the Hungarian method, a well-known algorithm taught in every graduate program. Graham Ashford moved quickly and confidently. He knew the technique cold.
Celeste looked at the problem for about 30 seconds. She did not start writing. She just stared. Then she saw something no one else saw. The problem had a hidden symmetry. The structure of the graph was bipartite, meaning it could be split into two groups with connections only between them, not within them. And that symmetry meant the entire problem could be reframed. Instead of using the standard method, Celeste converted it into a minimum cost flow problem on a much smaller network. She walked to the board and started writing. Her solution was half the length of everyone else's. She finished first. Not by a small margin, by a wide margin. Graham finished second. His answer was correct, but his approach was the long way around. He had built a highway. Celeste had found a shortcut no one else even knew existed. The panel scored. Celeste received the highest marks. Graham came in second. Whitfield, sitting in the audience, did not clap. His jaw tightened by exactly 1 millimeter. And the room began to shift. Students who had smirked at Celeste 2 days earlier were now leaning forward. A few pulled out their phones, not to mock her this time, to record her. Someone in the back row typed out a tweet. "An auditor from Howard is leading the Whitfield Challenge at Harvard. You need to see this." Within an hour, it had been retweeted over 200 times. Yo, wait, like, she really just walked into Harvard with a backpack and a cracked tablet education? And she's beating everybody? No one says anything. 'Cause the math? Yeah, it speaks for itself. And they're still looking at her like she's nothing? Nah, that's wild. Between rounds, something happened behind the scenes. Whitfield approached the panel during the break. He suggested that the remaining problems should increase in theoretical depth. That sounds reasonable. It was not. It was code. It meant shifting the problems toward areas that required access to cutting-edge research, the kind shared in exclusive Harvard seminars, the kind a student from Howard would never have seen. Dr. Calloway noticed. She did not object. Not yet. But she watched, and she began keeping a very careful record. Meanwhile, Celeste was in the hallway eating a granola bar from her backpack. She had no idea what was being discussed. She had no idea the rules were being quietly reshaped against her. She was just reviewing her notes and trying to ignore the fact that her hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer effort of being the only person in the room no one expected to be there. Nina found her in the hallway, sat down next to her, was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You know they are going to come for you, right?" Celeste looked at her. "I know." "And you are still going to do this?" "I did not ride a bus for 4 hours to quit after round 1. Nina almost smiled. But the next round would not be a standard problem from a textbook, and the scoring would not be what it seemed. Because while Celeste was eating a granola bar in a hallway, Professor Whitfield was in a room making sure the game she was winning would become a game she could not win. Round 2. The problem appeared on the board. It read, "Prove the following statement." Below it was a mathematical claim about a specific property of connected graphs. It looked straightforward. Every participant in the room picked up their chalk and began constructing a proof. Graham was writing fast. 2 other doctoral candidates were working through careful, methodical steps. The room was quiet, except for the sound of chalk on boards. Celeste did not pick up her chalk. She stood in front of the board and stared at the statement. 90 seconds passed. People in the audience started to whisper. Bradley Chambers leaned over to the person next to him and said, "Looks like she finally hit her ceiling." But Celeste was not stuck. She was thinking. And what she was thinking was something that no one else in the room had considered. The statement was false. Everyone else was trying to prove something that could not be proved. They were building roads to a city that did not exist. Celeste saw it.
She saw that if you constructed a small graph, just 6 vertices, carefully connected, the entire claim fell apart. She picked up the chalk. She drew the graph. 6 dots, a specific pattern of lines between them. She stepped back and said 5 words. This is a counterexample. The statement is false. The panel conferred. Dr. Calloway examined the graph closely. She checked each connection. She nodded.
The statement was indeed false. 3 participants were eliminated on the spot. They had wasted their entire time trying to prove something that was never true. Celeste moved forward. The scores were announced. Celeste received a 91. She frowned slightly, but said nothing. She had no way of knowing that the score on the panel's original sheet was 98. Someone had changed it between the scoring table and the announcement. 7 points stolen. We will come back to this. Round 3. The clock started. 3 minutes. The problem involved finding the maximum independent set in a specific class of graphs. In simple terms, given a network of connected points, find the largest group of points where none of them are directly connected to each other. 3 minutes does not sound like much. For this kind of problem, it is almost nothing. The other participants dove in immediately, working through the problem step by step. Graham was fast. His pen moved with precision. He was building the answer from the ground up, testing combinations, eliminating options. Celeste did something different. She looked at the graph and drew its complement, a mirror image where every connection became a gap and every gap became a connection. This transformed the independent set problem into a click problem. Finding the largest group of unconnected points in the original graph became finding the largest group of fully connected points in the new graph. And the new graph was much simpler. She identified the click visually. She wrote down the answer. She put the chalk down. 40 seconds remaining on the clock. Graham finished 12 seconds before the buzzer. His answer was correct, but Celeste had finished a full minute before him. 2 more participants were eliminated. The field was down to 4. Celeste, Graham, and 2 other doctoral candidates who were beginning to look very nervous. The semifinal pairings were announced, supposedly random.
Celeste versus Graham, the 2 doctoral candidates against each other. If you believe that pairing was random, you have not been paying attention to this story. That evening, the story started to spread. The tweet from round 1 had gone viral in academic circles. A mathematics blog published a short article with the headline, "Who is Celeste Ingram?" Someone dug up her Howard University transcript and posted it online. A journalist from the Boston Globe sent an email to Harvard's press office asking for comment. The story was no longer just about a competition, it was about a system. And people were watching. Back at her motel, 6 miles from campus, Celeste sat on the edge of the bed under a single lamp. A gas station sandwich sat half-eaten on the nightstand. Her notebook was open in her lap. She was reviewing graph theory problems, writing out solutions in handwriting so small it barely fit on the page. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from exhaustion. From the weight of spending 5 straight days in a room that punished her for existing. From smiling through insults. From pretending she did not hear the whispers. From solving problems at the highest level while carrying the invisible weight that no one else in that competition had to carry. There was a knock at the door. Nina. She came in and sat on the only chair in the room. She looked at Celeste's hands. She looked at the sandwich. She looked at the notebook. She did not say anything for a long time. Then, "You do not have to prove anything to them." Celeste did not look up. "I am not proving anything to them." "Then who?" Celeste stopped writing. She stared at the wall for a moment. Then she said, "Every girl in Anacostia who thinks this door is locked." Nina did not respond. There was nothing to say to that. It was the truest sentence either of them had spoken all week. The next morning, Celeste walked back into the lecture hall. The semifinal was in 3 hours.
The room was already buzzing. More people had shown up than the day before. Word had spread. A few faces in the crowd were new. One of them belonged to a journalist with a notebook. Graham Ashford was sitting in the front row reviewing notes. He looked relaxed, confident. He had every reason to be. He had spent 3 years studying under Whitfield. He had access to research papers, seminar materials, and techniques that were not available to anyone outside of Harvard's inner circle. Celeste had a backpack and a cracked tablet, but she also had something that Graham did not have. She had spent 10,000 hours alone with numbers. Not in a classroom, not with a tutor, not with a professor guiding her through the difficult parts. Alone, in a room with a single lamp. And in those 10,000 hours, she had learned something that no seminar could teach. She had learned to see the shape of problems she had never seen before. She sat down. She opened her notebook. She waited. She had solved 11 problems in a row. But the 12th one was different. The 12th one was built to break her. The semifinal problem appeared on the board. Celeste looked at it. Graham looked at it. The room looked at it. Graham smiled. Celeste did not. The problem involved proving a tight bound on a specific connectivity property in random networks. It was advanced, it was elegant, and it was not from any textbook, any published paper, or any publicly available source. It was from Professor Whitfield's own unpublished research. The technique required to solve it had only ever been taught in one place, Whitfield's private advanced seminar. A seminar that ran once a year. A seminar that only his hand-picked doctoral students could attend. Graham Ashford had taken that seminar. He had studied that technique. He had practiced it. He recognized the problem the way you recognize a song you have heard 100 times. Celeste Ingram had never seen it. She had never been invited to the seminar. She had never had access to the research. She was looking at a problem that had been specifically chosen to guarantee she would lose. The field had been tilted. Not through an obvious rule change, not through anything anyone could point to and call cheating. Through problem selection. The most elegant kind of rigging, the kind that looks fair on paper and is rotten underneath. And there was something else. Something Celeste would not learn until after it was all over. Her score in round 2 had been changed. Her actual score, the one written on the panel's original scoring sheet, was 98. The score that was announced to the room was 91. 7 points stolen. If the real score had stood, Celeste would have entered the semifinal with a commanding lead. Instead, she entered believing she was barely ahead. 2 manipulations, 2 invisible walls, both built by the same man. At the panel table, Dr. Calloway read the problem and her expression changed. She recognized it immediately. She had reviewed Whitfield's unpublished draft 6 months earlier as part of a peer consultation. She knew exactly where this problem came from. And she knew exactly what it meant. She wrote a note on her pad and slid it to the panelist beside her. It read, "This is from his draft. I need the original scoring sheets from round 2. The panelist read the note. He looked at Calloway. She did not look back. She was watching the board. The clock started. 15 minutes. Graham picked up his chalk with the confidence of a man who already knew the answer. Celeste picked up hers with the focus of a woman who knew she was walking into a trap. But she picked it up anyway.
Graham moved like a man taking a test he had already seen the answers to. His chalk flowed across the board in smooth, confident strokes. Every line followed the next without hesitation. He was not solving the problem, he was performing the solution. The technique from Whitfield's seminar fit the problem like a key in a lock. The room watched him with quiet admiration. 4 minutes in, he was 2/3 done. Celeste was at 1/3. She was working from first principles, no shortcut, no memorized technique. She was building the solution from the ground up, brick by brick, using only the tools she had brought with her, the ones she had taught herself in a motel room and a community center and a bedroom in Anacostia with one lamp and a cracked tablet. It was not fast enough. 6 minutes in, Graham was almost finished. Celeste was halfway. The gap was visible. The audience could see it. The whispering started. She's falling behind. She had a good run. This was always going to happen. Bradley Chambers leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. He looked satisfied. Whitfield sat in the audience with his hands folded. His expression was calm, patient, the expression of a man watching a trap work exactly as designed. 8 minutes in, Celeste made a mistake. She transposed 2 indices in her derivation, a small error, the kind that happens when your brain is running faster than your hand. She caught it almost immediately. But the correction cost her a full minute, a minute she did not have. The clock showed 5 minutes remaining. Graham was nearly done. Celeste was staring at a board full of work that was not finished. And then something happened that had not happened at any point in this story. Celeste stopped writing. Her chalk hand dropped 2 inches. Her shoulders shifted. Her breathing changed. For 3 seconds, exactly 3 seconds, she looked like a woman who was about to put the chalk down and walk away from the board. 300 people saw it. Some felt sympathy. Some felt vindicated. Bradley Chambers almost laughed.
Nina Dawson, sitting in the 6th row, was gripping the armrest so hard her knuckles were white. She was not breathing. Then Celeste looked up, not at the board, not at Graham, not at Whitfield. She looked at the audience, and somewhere in the 6th row, her eyes found Nina. Nina did not nod. She did not smile. She did not mouth any words of encouragement. She just looked at Celeste. Steady, unblinking, without pity, without fear. Sometimes the most powerful thing someone can do is simply refuse to look away. Celeste turned back to the board. She stared at her work for 2 seconds. Then she did something no one expected. She erased 3 lines. Not a correction, not a fix. She wiped out an entire section of her approach and started over. She abandoned the standard path completely. She was not going to chase Graham's technique. She was not going to play the game Whitfield had designed for her to lose. She was going to build her own. A new construction appeared on the board.
An auxiliary graph, a mapping between 2 structures that no one in the room had seen before. She was not following any textbook. She was not applying any known method. She was inventing something in real time, under pressure, with 300 people watching and a clock counting down. Graham put his chalk down. Done. The room applauded. His solution was clean, correct, and built on the technique he had been handed. Whitfield nodded in approval. The clock showed 90 seconds remaining. Celeste was still writing. Her chalk was moving fast, faster than it had moved all day. New lines, new inequalities. The auxiliary graph was taking shape. 60 seconds, 30 seconds. She was running out of board space. She moved to the bottom right corner and wrote the final line, small but clear, the line that completed the proof. The buzzer sounded. But Dr. Evelyn Calloway had been watching the entire board from the panel table.
and she had seen something that everyone else missed.
Celeste stepped back from the board. The buzzer was still ringing in the air.
Whitfield stood up. He walked to the front of the room with the slow, measured stride of a man who had already decided the outcome. He positioned himself directly in front of the whiteboard, directly in front of the bottom right corner where Celeste had written her final line, and faced the audience. "Time," he said. "Mr. Ashford has completed his solution. Unfortunately, Miss Ingram's work appears to be incomplete." He gestured toward the board behind him. From the audience's angle, the main body of Celeste's proof was visible, the auxiliary graph, the mapping, the inequalities. But the final line, the one she had written in the corner in the last seconds, was hidden behind Whitfield's body. The room saw an unfinished board. Graham was awarded the round. The audience clapped, polite, restrained, the kind of applause that says, "Well, that is that." Celeste stood at the side of the stage, silent.
Still, her face gave away nothing. Nina, in the 6th row, had tears running down her face. Not because it was sad, because it was unfair. Because everyone in the room had just watched a rigged game produce exactly the result it was rigged to produce. Graham shook hands with 2 of the panelists. Whitfield was already preparing to announce the final round format. The story, it seemed, was over. Every person in that room thought it was over, including me. Then Dr. Evelyn Calloway spoke. "Professor Whitfield." Her voice was not loud. She did not raise it. She did not need to. It was the kind of voice that stops a room, not because of its volume, but because of its authority. 25 years at Princeton, hundreds of published papers, a named chair in number theory. When Evelyn Calloway said your name, you stopped what you were doing. Whitfield stopped. "Before you proceed," Calloway said, "I would like to examine Miss Ingram's board." Whitfield blinked. "The solution is incomplete, Dr. Calloway. We all saw—" "Humor me." 2 words. The room went silent. Not the uncomfortable silence from before, a different kind. The kind where 300 people suddenly realized they might be about to witness something they did not expect. Calloway stood. She pushed her chair back. She walked from the panel table to the whiteboard. Every eye in the room followed her. Whitfield had no choice. A Princeton professor, a fellow of the American Mathematical Society, had made a public request to examine a contestant's work. Refusing would be an admission that he had something to hide. He stepped aside, and when he moved, the bottom right corner of the board became visible. Calloway began at line 1. She traced Celeste's proof with her finger, the auxiliary graph construction, the bijection, the one-to-one mapping between edge sets in the original problem and vertex covers in the new structure, the probabilistic counting argument. Each step building on the last. Clean, logical, original. Her finger reached the end of the main body of work. She kept going. It moved to the bottom right corner. She stopped. She read the final line. She read it again. Then she turned to face the room. 5 seconds of silence. In those 5 seconds, 300 people were confused. Graham was frowning. Whitfield's smile was frozen in place like a mask that no longer fit. Nina had stopped breathing. Celeste had not moved. 5 seconds. It felt like 5 minutes. Then Calloway spoke. "The proof is complete." She pointed to the corner. "The final line is here, written in the last seconds before the clock expired." She paused. She looked at the board one more time. Then she said, "The bound is tight. The bijection is original, and it is, without question, the most elegant proof presented in this competition." For one more second, the room was still. One more second of 300 people processing what they had just heard. One more second of recalculating everything they thought they knew. Then the room broke open. It did not start with applause. It started with a gasp. Someone in the 3rd row, then a murmur that rippled outward like a stone dropped in water. Then clapping, not the polite kind from before, the real kind, the kind that starts in one place and spreads until it fills the room. Students stood. The postdoctoral researcher in the front row covered her mouth with both hands. 2 professors on the panel started clapping before the third had even processed what happened. Nina was sobbing, not quietly, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep, from a place where every insult, every dismissal, every closed door had been stored and compressed and was now releasing all at once. Graham Ashford stared at the bottom right corner of the board. He stared at it for a long time. Then he turned to Celeste. He did not look angry. He did not look resentful. He looked like a man who had just watched someone do something he could not do. He started clapping. He was the first person standing in his row. Whitfield did not clap. He did not stand. He stood at the side of the stage and looked at the corner of the board, the corner he had been standing in front of, the corner he had blocked when he declared her solution incomplete. Whether he knew the final line was there is a question only he can answer. But 300 people saw where he had been standing, and 300 people would remember. Celeste did not celebrate. She did not pump her fist. She did not cry. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. When she opened them, she looked at the board. Not at the audience, not at Whitfield, not at the cameras. She looked at her own work, because the proof was the only thing in that room that had never lied to her. Calloway turned to the panel.
I move that we reevaluate the semifinal scores. Miss Ingram's proof is not only complete, it is superior. The bijection is original. The approach is more general than the standard method. I further move that the competition be awarded outright. There is nothing a final round could add. The panel voted 3-0, unanimous. Celeste Ingram won the Whitfield Challenge. Graham shook her hand. That bijection was something I have never seen. Where did that come from? Celeste looked at him. I did not have your technique, so I had to build my own path. Graham paused, then quietly, your path was better. The room was still applauding, but the story was not over, because Dr. Calloway was not finished. She had one more thing to say, and when she said it, the applause would stop, and the silence that followed would be the loudest sound that room had ever heard. The applause was still fading when Calloway stood again. Nobody had left. 300 people, phones still out. Some are still recording. She walked to the center of the stage, carrying 2 documents. Before we conclude, there is a matter of record. The room went quiet. She held up the first document. The semifinal problem was traced to an unpublished research draft, authored by Professor Whitfield, dated 6 months ago. The technique required to solve it was taught exclusively in his private seminar, available only to his doctoral students. She held up the second document. This is the original scoring sheet from round 2. Miss Ingram's actual score was 98. The score announced to this room was 91. She placed both documents on the table. The discrepancy has been documented. 300 heads turned to Whitfield. Then the phones came up. Not a few, 100. Red recording lights blinked across the auditorium like unblinking eyes. Dean Harold Prescott stood from the 5th row. He saw the phones. He saw the journalist from the Boston Globe scribbling in the 3rd row. The Whitfield Lecture Series is suspended immediately.
pending review by the Office of Academic Integrity. Professor Whitfield, you are relieved of all administrative duties, including department chair, effective now." He paused. "Additionally, I believe an acknowledgement is owed to Miss Ingram." "Professor Whitfield?" Every camera pointed at one man. Whitfield stood. His face was gray. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Miss Ingram, I owe you an apology. The competition should have been conducted fairly. It was not. That is my responsibility." The words came out like they were being pulled with pliers. But they were public. They were recorded. They could never be unsaid. Within 6 hours, the video had 2 million views. By morning, the story was on the front page of the Boston Globe, the New York Times, and CNN. 3 former students came forward with similar accounts. His publisher paused his textbook. Speaking invitations vanished. 61 years of prestige collapsed in 61 hours. Harvard does not fire tenured professors. It lets them become invisible. 2 days later, the lecture hall was empty. Celeste came back to collect a notebook she had left behind. The room was silent. The seats were empty. The lights were dim. But the whiteboard was still there, and her proof was still on it. No one had erased it. She was not alone. Whitfield was standing in front of the board, not performing, not lecturing, just standing there, looking at her work. His career was in ruins. His name had been removed from the series his family built. His office had been reassigned. But none of that was on his face right now. He was just looking at the math. He heard her footsteps and turned. "Miss Ingram, the bijection. Where did you learn that technique?" "I did not learn it. I built it." A long pause, the longest silence between 2 people in this entire story. No cameras, no audience, no performance. Just a man and a woman and a proof on a board. "Yes, I can see that." It was not an apology. The apology had already been extracted in public, in front of cameras, and it had meant nothing. This was different. This was a man standing alone in front of a proof he could not have written, admitting, to himself as much as to her, that he had been wrong about her. Celeste received the letter of recommendation reviewed by committee. She applied to 3 doctoral programs, accepted to all 3. She chose MIT, not Harvard. She did not choose the institution that finally let her in. She chose the one that wanted her from the start. On the bus ride home to DC, she called Nina. "How does it feel?" Celeste thought for a moment. "It feels like the door was never locked. We just could not see the handle." Real talk. This one hits different for me. 'Cause Celeste, she didn't argue, didn't beg. She just showed up and let the work talk. And that guy who tried to erase her? Yeah, everybody saw him instead. And that's the thing right there. Truth? You can try to block it, but you're not stopping it. If this story reminded you of someone whose talent the world has not seen yet, send it to them. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe, because Celeste Ingram is not the last. She is just the beginning.